Welcome to the Almighty AI Podcast. This week we're going to talk about some more about the displacing of jobs. So I don't know what you've been hearing about AI the last few weeks, but I heard a really good example of some people doing a test on whether their job was going to be legitimate in the future. So there's a podcast called Planet Money. So NPR does it, but all they do is economics. And usually they're just little stories to teach you about basics of economics. They don't really aggressively cover current news stories necessarily or talk about, what the Fed's doing day to day or anything like that. They're just like an educational podcast. So they were going to do a podcast on the job replacement of when we got rid of phone operators. So you've probably heard stories of when we used to have operators. You would dial zero. I think they still existed when I was like a little kid, but you would dial zero and they would tell you, you'd say who you want to talk to, and there was a person on the other side, and they were almost always a woman. Like at some point, it was said that every woman in the entire country was going to be a phone operator.
Right.
And they would, move the little peg things or whatever they were called, plug them in different places. So they were going to do a podcast on that because there had been an academic paper written about it. And so the people that were doing the Planet Money podcast, they said, let's have AI make this podcast as much as we possibly can and have AI write the script for it.
Interesting.
And see how good it is. So it was two guys that did it, and they had their coworkers come in at the end of the podcast to see how good it was. And it was pretty impressive. So granted, it's not like they typed in make a podcast about this and then it was done. They had to do quite a bit of work. But one of the things they did was they had some NPR voice who I don't know. I guess he's been around for a long time. They had his voice be generated by AI. So, there's like hours, not like thousands of hours of this guy's voice on recording. So they took it to a place and copied his voice. So he would read the script in his voice, and apparently it sounded just super similar. I mean, some of the people are like, well, I can tell a difference, but I had no idea. I could not tell. I mean, maybe if I...
It's kind of creepy if you can.
It is. And these were his coworkers, so maybe it was appropriate. But they did that, and so they copied his voice. They had it write the script, and they would say, like, oh, make it funnier, or make it less dystopian, or... As a matter of fact, I think the way they ended up doing was they had it be like a Terminator type feel, end of the world Terminator type feel.
Okay.
And what's wild is they were going to interview the people that wrote this academic paper. So when they interviewed them, they had the AI write all the questions, and the person they were interviewing said, wow, these are really good questions. At least you guys will never be replaced.
Oh, no. Yikes.
It was super funny. Super funny. So they do this podcast. They put it together, and I think it was good. And they show their coworker, they had their coworkers listen to it, and their coworkers agreed that it's good. It was in the style of Planet Money. They have these certain, kind of, the templates that they do. I'm sure if you listen to 20 Planet Moneys in a row, you would start, noticing the template. Yeah. And they all agreed it was really good. But guess what the podcast said? So the podcast was going. It was talking about being replaced. This, it talked about the last woman operator that existed and, being replacement. And then it made this comment at the end that, well, humans will never be replaced because humans are... Guess what the AI said was the thing that was unique about humanity, that even though, maybe we don't need phone operators anymore, but humans will always be able to do.
What?
Yes. You have any guesses what it thinks it would be?
No.
So it basically said, well, humans are funny.
Humans are funny.
And have humor.
It's relative.
That's
some very unfunny people.
Do you think that AI is going to be good at being funny?
I think it depends on the kind of humor you like. Witty humor, probably not. Like, all the reasons why I like The Office, minus, like, the crudeness, like, I don't think AI could do that. It's too witty. And it reads people, like, in the moment. Like, a good comedian has to be able to read people in the moment and make jokes on the fly. I don't think AI could do that. If we're talking, like, Three Stooges funny, just, like, I'm gonna hit you and then I'm gonna play a laugh track and you're gonna laugh, then yeah, it could probably be funny.
So you may be right. I'm not super sure, but how do you even describe why something's funny?
Well, okay, but this depends on your sense of humor. For me, it comes down to like irony, like if it's ironic, satire, like if you're really like drawing on obvious stereotypes to make something funny, like kind of like Animal Farm is kind of funny to me, just because like it represents like Russia and Stalin and all that, but it's just animals on a farm,
right.
You know? And it's pretty serious too, but it's kind of funny. So like satire, irony, what else? What else makes things funny? I guess it just kind of, what makes you laugh?
Well, I mean, I thought about this quite a bit, and I realized I cannot articulate very well why things are funny. So there are some, if you talk about a stand-up comedian, some of the things they'll tell you they do is they point out things that happen in society that are just dumb. And when you just like bring them out, you don't even hardly have to make fun of it. It's just obviously stupid, you know? Like a joke like, you know, why do we drive on parkways and park on driveways? You know, like, it doesn't make any sense, you know. And the reason we drive on parkways, I think, is back to some, you know, Robert Moses in New York City, if I remember correctly, because he was the head of the parks department and he wanted to put in highways and he couldn't, so he called them parkways.
Oh, no.
Or so whatever. And why we call our driveways when, you know, they're really a parking place, and for the most part,
I've never thought of that.
Very, you know, so anyway, that's I get that, right? And like comedians will say that's what they're doing. But there's lots of things where we kind of laugh all day long where we're not taking some sort of societal thing that's obviously wrong. And I realized the more I thought about it, I'm not sure I can tell you why certain things we laugh at are funny. I mean, or at least in a way that I could like write it down and explain it to someone who didn't understand why it was funny.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this. So, like, I think some of it is, like, randomness. I think randomness makes people laugh. Like, if it's a random sound or if it's just, like, what happens is so out of context that it's so random. It makes people laugh. But then I was also thinking about, like, why TikTok is so big right now and why people keep scrolling and why they laugh. Maybe it's a little bit of, like, relatableness. Like, if you see it happen to somebody else and you're like, oh, been there, done that, it makes you laugh. You think it's funny. But that's hard, too, because people laugh for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes people laugh when they're angry. And you're just like, oh.
Oh, they're nervous, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I've noticed that as a person who does public speaking all the time, if you're public speaking, it is so much easier to get people to laugh. Like jokes I tell in a sermon or little funny anecdotes I say that I get a little bit of laugh from everybody. If we were in a one-on-one conversation, you would not laugh. Yeah, you would not laugh.
So funny.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it would not be funny, right? So even just like making a joke about me drinking Dr. Pepper is funny on stage. But if I made a joke with you, like you know, I mean, you know, I like Dr. Pepper, you know, like you wouldn't care. It wouldn't be funny.
Maybe it's because it's a little bit situational. Like jokes for humans and like things being funny, it has to be within the right context and situational. Whereas like it would be very hard for AI to read that. Mm-hmm. But also, I think that like, I think humans enjoy other people's personalities. And so like, for instance, like Joe Rogan, people watch him because he's Joe Rogan, right? Like if an AI did his podcast, they could probably get like pretty close to Joe Rogan, but I don't think people would watch as much because it's just like they like him for who he is. So if he replaces himself with a bot, like it's not the same.
Twitch streamers are the same that play video games. At some point, the video games isn't the interesting part. People like the people who's good at talking, playing the video game.
Don't let kids do that. It seems so dumb to me.
It's super fun. I've watched lots of hours of people playing Minecraft. It's pretty great.
I have a brother-in-law who does this, but he will watch streamers and play video games while he's watching the streamers. Okay, so he's watching and he's playing his own game, and then he's done it so much that now he twitches. And like you'll talk to him, he'll just twitch.
Really?
Yes, because he's stared at the screen for so long.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway, what's interesting about this is they had, I think I remember it correctly, they had a situation where they told the AI to like add some jokes.
Okay.
Okay. So, that says the whole thing's not funny, so they had to write some jokes. And one of the jokes that the AI wrote was a knock-knock joke.
Oh, no.
And it went something like, knock, knock, who's there? And it said, some short, pithy phrase, right? And then, whatever who. And then it gave this really long, dry explanation.
Of the joke.
Yeah, of the joke, right?
That's actually really funny.
And guess what? Everybody laughed, right?
Yeah,
Everybody laughed.
really
And so
funny.
then what happened was these people that made the podcast said they started like making, this thing clearly doesn't understand humor, and and then they went around the office, they said, or their friends, and started telling them the knock knock joke, and they all laughed because it was dumb, right? It was so dumb. I mean, everybody laughed, so they were getting this big kick out of this, how dumb it was, and then at the end of the podcast, they were talking about how. Why wasn't it as good as it could be? Why were they providing, value as humans? And how close were they being replaced? And one of the guys said he went back and asked the AI, he went and found that conversation again, and it went and asked the AI why that knock-knock joke was funny. Because they got laughs all over the place, right? And it explained in detail why it was funny. Because they said, well, knock-knock jokes are supposed to have short answers, and because I provided a really long one, and that was so unexpected, it gave like a detailed explanation of why people would laugh, and it is why people laugh.
Yeah.
And so the guy was just sort of like had been encouraged that this AI was so dumb it couldn't do a knock knock joke, but then he went around telling everybody the knock knock joke because he knew it would make them laugh, and when he asked the AI why it would be funny. It knew it was going to be funny for the very reason he went around and told everybody the knock-knock joke. And so he was just like, I was basically making fun of this thing, yet it understood it.
It understood it, yeah.
And I'm going to take this back to the Bible a little bit in kind of a way you might not be expecting. But, context and being able to explain humor is very hard for us to do, to explain why things are human. And hearing a computer kind of give a really long explanation of why things are computer reminded me of something. When I was in my doctoral work and I was taking a Greek class, I was required to read an English book that I didn't understand why I had to read this English book. And at the end, I still was bad at Greek, but the English book made a incredibly important point that I will never forget. And, well, I'll probably forget it eventually, but I haven't forgot it yet, and it's been a while. And that is something like words only mean something in a context. Words in and of themselves don't really have a lot of meaning.
Right.
So when you say, well, that's cool, I mean, obviously, if you say that's cool, you could mean temperature, or you could mean the person's,
right.
An awesome person or whatever, and only the context tells you what that word means. Mm-hmm. And so by writing the word cool down on a piece of paper and having, dictionary definitions for it, I mean, I guess that, I'm not saying it has zero value, but if you really want to know what it means, context is all that matters. You have to have the context. And even to know which preposition to use. Why do you live on this street at this address?
Yeah.
Why at this address but on this street?
Yep. I
mean, it doesn't make any sense. Which preposition you use, and the only way to know is by the context. And the way that we've studied Greek in the past was very, very learn the definition of the word, study the definition of the word,
memorize it,
and then go to the text and put that definition in. And so my professor was trying very hard to get us to realize, if you just try to take a definition and put it in, and don't heavily consider that the context is literally deciding what that word means,
right,
you are not doing it right. And so if you've ever heard a sermon where the pastor heavily will say, well, let's take this word, yes, and what does it mean in Greek? And let me read you the 3 definitions of Strong's or whatever. I don't want to completely discount that, but that is often done incorrectly.
Right.
Because the context decides what the meaning is. I mean, the most egregious, and I think I only ever heard this done once, was one sermon I heard. Basically, the 3 points of the message were the 3 definitions of Strong's or whatever, right? Or whatever lexicon he was using. And that's just completely wrong. It meant a certain thing, and the only way that person was going to be able to know that certain thing was by understanding the context around it. And because of that, I think we have a really, really, really hard time seeing things like humor in the Bible. How do we know when it's funny?
Yeah. That's a good point.
Like if I said, list all the times that a biblical author was being funny.
Yeah, like the only thing is that I could say is like sometimes when I read the New Testament and like Jesus talking to his disciples, I think it's like maybe that was sarcasm. Like this is really funny. Like I think he just said you're stupid, but there's no way to know.
There's no way to know.
Yeah, you put your own personality and you're like, well, if I was Jesus, this is what I'd do.
Yeah,
You know, and it becomes funny.
the other day in a sermon, I said, well, maybe this is sarcasm because to me it sounded sarcastic. But it's just so hard to know whether that was considered sarcastic back then. And so I think that's a super, super big challenge. And so, we were all kind of as students like, well, how do we solve this problem? So if I can't just study really hard and memorize a whole bunch of definitions or whatever, and then I go to the text, how am I supposed to be able to get this figured out? And so my professor's solution was, well, the way you would do it in English, how would you know whether to be is on this street or at this address?
How would you know?
How do you know which one it is? Why not at this street on this address?
I've thought about this so much, actually. Because, like, I was an English major and I took a linguistics class, and we were talking about prepositions and, like, on, at, in. Like, why are they so interchangeable, but yet they're not? Like, it's very distinctive. I have no idea. I don't know what the answer is, other than you just grow up and you hear it, and so you just soak it in.
That was his answer. Basically, in English, you just grow it up and hear it and soak it in and eventually figure it out. So I remember being so bad at spelling and people telling me, well, the only way to get better at spelling is by reading. Because you just see so many words, you eventually know it looks wrong. So like Bethany's a better speller than I, but it's not like she can articulate with all the rules why something's spelled right or wrong.
Yeah.
She doesn't really have some amazing, inside knowledge I don't have on how English works. She just, has read a lot. And while I've read a lot, I didn't quite get the whole visual picture thing as well, right? I apparently didn't just, have all these pictures of all these words in my head as well as she did. So she was always better at spelling than I am. So what he was saying is the only way to try to get these nuances of trying to figure things out in Greek is by reading.
By learning Greek. You have to learn Greek. Go to Greece.
And going to Greece won't help because they don't even speak Koine Greek.
It's a different Greek.
Yeah. So in the New Testament, they spoke Koine Greek. As a matter of fact, for years, we didn't even think it was a real Greek language. We thought it was a heavenly language because we didn't have any other examples of Koine Greek outside the Bible. But since we found a bunch of examples...
That's funny.
And it was not only not a heavenly language of the angels, it was actually the reason we didn't have any examples of it was because only the common people spoke Koine Greek.
That makes sense.
So it was written in the common language. So he was basically just saying, you should read Koine Greek outside of the Bible as much as you can. So the way you normally study Greek...
How would you do that? What are you going to find in Koine Greek?
So we have now found documents in Koine Greek that you could go read.
Are they fun reads? Are they easy reads? Like, is this like, what kind of read is this?
It's not gonna be...
This cannot be fun. This has to be like archives of like, so-and-so sold a field to so-and-so this much money.
Yeah, maybe Pliny the Younger or something like that might be a little bit more interesting. But he basically said, if you really want to know English and, whether to use at and on, you just, immerse yourself in as much English as possible, And so he was just saying you've got to read as much Greek as possible. So he's like, I spend a lot of time reading Greek things that aren't the Bible. Because if you only ever read the Bible, there's already so much interpretation provided in your head, even just from the time you were a kid. You're just not really reading it. And most people that learn Greek like I did, we can't read Greek outside the Bible because we only learn the vocabulary.
Well, you kind of know what's coming.
You know it's coming, and you memorize a whole bunch of vocabulary, but you only memorize the vocabulary words that appear in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so you don't even know the other words, and obviously not every Greek word in the Bible. And you memorize it down to I think we went down to one occurrence, right? If it occurred more than once, we had to memorize it. So then every time a word only appeared once, you didn't have it memorized. And, I was a PhD student. Master students don't go down to one occurrence. They don't, not even close. So then they're getting to a word they don't know, and they either have they use a computer, which gives them the definition, or maybe, they just have the verse half memorized, so they kind of know, or maybe they have a special, if they have a paper Bible, sometimes they'll have Bibles that give you the definitions of the words at the bottom if they appear not very many times.
I feel like it would be so much easier just to learn Greek than to do it that way.
But how do you learn Greek? So the way we've always done it was
based through the Bible.
Always based on the Bible. You start your first, semester of Greek, you're already memorizing, words, and what words are you memorizing? You're memorizing the words, that appear in the Bible, and then you're memorizing endings and so on and so forth. So where I'm kind of going all this is so often I don't know about amateur, I'm sure they spend a lot of effort onto it, and there's nothing magical about having a PhD or whatever, but some person that's just kind of maybe a little bit on their own, they read the Bible, they learn Greek, and then they come up with some very unique interpretation that no one else has. And I think that they're probably not fully realizing that they can't and when I listen to some of the things talk, it is often very much like, well, here's what the Greek says, da 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 da, and it's like you have a lot of confidence that you can know Greek by looking up things in a dictionary.
Yeah.
And if you tried to learn English purely by looking things up in a dictionary, look up the word trunk in a dictionary and then try to figure out which trunk you're talking about, you could get really, really, really messed up. And so many nuances it's like the word cool is just like, that's cool. Could mean. What you did, I'm not mad about. Right?
Yeah.
You do this, you're apologizing, and say, oh, well, that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I don't mean that's good. I like that. I want you to do that again,
like,
or you're awesome. I mean, it is what it is, or something like that, right? And so I think people that have not a incredibly good understanding of Greek, to me, are just wildly dangerous. I mean, I just felt like the level of Greek I learned didn't make me insanely insightful necessarily. It just made me possibly just
more
super
confused.
dangerous.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because when you would hang around this professor that was working really, really hard, I'm sure he was wrong sometimes. I'm not saying he didn't get things wrong. I'm sure he did. But his chances of getting it right were a lot better than mine. You know what I mean? Just a lot better than mine. And so, people talk about translation things. Like even in my sermon on Sunday, I'll talk a little bit about translations and stuff. And I just think we need to understand. I think AI, this example here, to me, reminded me of this window into how languages work and how it's hard to understand why things are funny. It's hard to know why things are the way they are without a whole bunch of context. It's a reason the AI thought in its little story, said, well, AI is going to have a hard time understanding humor. But when AI did understand humor, it gave a really long explanation that I'm not sure I could have even gave. I don't know I could have explained why everyone was laughing at that joke as well as the AI understood it. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I was interested to hear maybe your thoughts on it. So
very cool.
Well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll keep up with what's going on in AI. Just today, Mariah was working on a website and noticed some AI had been integrated into that, so we're seeing it all over the place.
Yes.
And so we'll probably be back next week to look more into it.